All right. Hi, everybody. It is noon, Wednesday, July 10th, and we are entering into week 6 of understanding the business of wine. I've got Paul online with me. And before we launch in, Paul, any questions, comments, topics?
No, I'm just kind of interested to see kind of how we progress and kind of into the distribution and retail stuff, because that's, I guess, kind of where my perhaps future interest lies a little bit more. Yeah, so just kind of interested to see how we progress and stuff like that.
Okay, terrific. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will get this show on the road. So a couple things. Number one, let me talk about a little bit about the final projects. And anybody who wishes can get started on those. And the intention with the final projects is you get to kind of determine where you want to put your focus on any independent research or in the scope of, for example, Paul was just sharing with me that he's most interested in the distribution and retail and that kind of stuff. Do you have a goal in mind with that, Paul, career-wise, or just to show?
Possibly. Well, I was in banking for 25 years, so I'm kind of changing careers now. I've taken a little time off, and I'm thinking about what I'm doing next. So, wine has always kind of been a passion, more from a drinking standpoint. So now it's time to learn a little bit more and see if I can get involved.
Oh, that's great.
So
And then is kind of your direction you're thinking to actually produce a brand, or?
I was actually thinking about perhaps going into partnership with someone that already owns a store, and getting involved with that and building out that brand and perhaps growing the number of sites. It's currently only in New York, and then there's a kind of a distribution in California, but we thought also Miami. I've got relatives and stuff like that, so that would be an interesting place. It was more kind of a higher end kind of wine store, and we thought that the market is certainly there for that in New York, but also in Miami, certainly in and around that region. There's a lot of people that have no problem spending money on wine and stuff like that, or champagne and like that. So, and it seems like there's kind of like a lack of, I would say, kind of specialty stores in the region. I mean, there is a Total Wine down there, certainly, but it's just it's a huge kind of like warehouse type place. Maybe something a little bit more effective.
Hang on, everybody. I've got, I think, a mail at my door. I've got a sign. Let me see. Thank you. And I'm back. And we have Noel joining us.
I actually had a friend who actually just started selling his wine, Coraval. He used to work for me and went out and did harvest, I think, for like 5-6 years, and kind of been passionate about, wine and stuff. And he just came out with his brand, and he's just got licenses to sell in New York State, New Jersey. He has been complaining how difficult it is with the regulatory side of things. It's just such a pain, as you've attested to.
Yeah, and so taking what Paul's saying is a way to structure, for example, your final project. I'm going to be sending everybody a copy of a simple Word document. It's called the Wine Sim Business Plan, and it's a structured way to go to think about a product, and in your case, Paul, you can think about a product that's being destined to go through the system that you're trying to build, a retail store, right?
Yeah.
A week from today, I'm going to introduce you to a new workbook that should be really, really handy if your interests are developing a retail store.
Okay.
It's actually designed to do a complete pro forma for a tasting room, but it can also very easily be used to start the financial for a retail store. And as we go through the construct of the business plan, let me start by saying what your final project requirement is. You've got until up to 4 weeks after the end of the course, all right? And so the course ends in a few weeks, and then you'll have an additional 4 weeks. But I urge everybody to kind of keep on time. Don't let time get away from you, all right? And what you'll need to turn in the last week or up to 4 weeks after is going to be a copy of this business plan template. Just work on it, save it, and submit it to me, and then I'll tick you off on the spreadsheet. And a financials for either your blending project or a cost of goods project. So there will be the wine financials and the business plan, and they should correspond. Does that make sense? In terms of the cost of goods or the wine blending project, the cost of goods could be any wine you want to make. So if you're planning a 1,000 cases of a very expensive wine, or even 100 cases, or whatever you would like it to be, you can start a new cost of goods. For newbies or people who are already overwhelmed, don't sweat, don't worry about it. Just work on the $25 red blend. But I really, really urge everybody to revisit that cost of goods financial workbook, just simply to work into your head, okay, cost of grapes, how is that broken down? How does the cost of grapes transfer into how many cases? And then how does that start to look? And what's the range? You know, you could do a wine from anywhere around the world. It gets a little bit more challenging if you're trying to do an Italian wine or so forth. You'll be working in US dollars, but it gives you a chance to do some research. You know, what are bulk wines from the Languedoc in France selling for example? How much is a ton of grapes in Burgundy if you were to be really crazy and do something like that? So just use it as a structure so that you can understand the supply chain. Boom, boom, boom. Here's a sequence of things. Here are the kind of decisions that have to be made. And then here's the critical thinking between quality and cost and allocation of time and effort. And then also from beginning to end, what's kind of the timeline, which for one wine might be just a few months. Even if you're fermenting it in whatever, if it's a Moscato or a Rosé or something like that, to many years. If it's a reserve quality, it's going to have aging and cellaring, etc. Okay. So any questions about that? Two components of the final thing: the business plan that we're going to start to go over, and the financial workbook. Is that clear?
Tim, just sorry, one question. So if I were to do like the retail store as my kind of template for a business plan, the financials, am I doing it on the back of the store, or am I doing it on the back of taking a wine from the vineyard and distributing it to the customer.
So there will be the requirements to complete the course, which are going to be a wine, and then I'm going to show you what you can also start to do sort of simultaneously, if you will.
Okay, thanks.
All right, and so if you've got a business in mind like Paul does, and what you can do, Paul, is say, you know, what kind of wine would I really love to source? So pick something you're passionate about, pick a price range, and then think it through. If I were the producer and wanted to sell to Paul in his stores, you know, what am I looking for? What are the key points? What am I competing against? Those kind of things. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a separate workbook, completely optional. And have you started a formal or a casual business plan yet, Paul?
No, I haven't. No.
So you can kind of use loosely this structure or find some sort of business plan template and maybe start noodling. What do you need to be thinking about? And the basic construct is the same as we go through it. I'll actually make references for you as well.
Great, thank you.
All right, and then for anybody, including you, Paul, within the next couple weeks, if you're getting your work done and everything's going good on your final projects, you can call me about any questions or details that you might like to discuss. If you're taking this course for education purposes for advancing certifications and WSET Master of Wine, let's have a call. And then if you've got a side project like Paul, and you and I can do this over the course of the next couple of weeks, Paul, we can have a dedicated call specific to you know, where you're intending to go with what you learn here.
Great, thank you.
Okie doke. So that's what's due at the end of the course. And as I've already discussed, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to kind of shift critical thinking into SWOT analysis. And then that ability to look at strengths and weaknesses, which are the SW of SWOT. Strengths and weaknesses are, if you're doing a personal SWOT analysis, it would be, say, your strengths and weaknesses. What are you good at? What are you not good at? Very typically, we tend to overemphasize the strengths and avoid the weaknesses. And so from a business standpoint, it's really imperative to break that thinking up, because it's by looking at the weaknesses that can have you start to get, okay, you know, here's the jobs that need to be done, or here's something I need to learn, or I need to have somebody who have those skills to help me in this. The opportunities and threats are external. So let's say you were doing a SWOT analysis of yourself for a job position, and then looking what's the general economy, what opportunities in the wine industry are there for somebody with my skill set, and what kind of threats are out there. And so for example, some of the things, just using the job search career advancement thing, one of a couple of the threats that are looming is that wine sales may be hitting a plateau and might even start to trend down. Obviously, that's going to impact sales, that's going to impact budgets. And so that could be a threat for somebody newly entering the market.
How much?
Go ahead.
What do you think? I guess at some point we expect cannabis to be legal across the states. You know, it's kind of a couple of the articles kind of mention that as, you know, maybe that taking some away from the wine business as well, plateauing. What, do you have any kind of thoughts on that, or is it just completely different? And
no, you know, and there are a lot of correlations, and just as we were having the discussion, Rich brought up something really, I think that was a great example is how can you take other businesses and apply kind of the thinking and the distribution and so forth of, in his case, produce. He's really expert in this. I've actually done a lot of work in that area as well, not only as a buyer, as a chef, and my years as a retailer, but also I worked with a guy named Rick Antle, and I'm sure Rich would recognize that name. They're Tannemer and Antle, and they were looking at Tannemer and Antle's the largest independent produce grower in the U.S. And they've been constantly trying to innovate and improve the opportunities, eliminate distribution weaknesses, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can look at cannabis in a couple ways. Number one is, what kind of threat is cannabis going to present? And then also keep in mind that cannabis, as is beer and increasingly cocktails, are tending to try to take cues from the success of wine recently, and then apply a lot of the marketing success of wine to cannabis. So living in the beautiful state of Oregon, we've got, I think, 29 licensed cannabis stores here. They are fascinating. I love going into them and talking to the bud tenders. So they took the word bartender and they take on this kind of role as a sommelier or something like that, to the point of being ridiculous. How the different varieties and growers and region and the specifications, like we would talk about, you know, total acidity and residual sugar and alcohol levels and even phenolics and so forth, they talk about with the various strains and where it's grown. They use the word terroir. They use a lot of wine terms in positioning different products. So it could be, and seriously, Merlot Kush, that kind of stuff. And if it's a purple Kush, then you can relate it to a red wine kind of a thing. And the beer industry, frankly, kind of shooting themselves in the foot, going with beer and food matching. I'll go on about my thoughts on wine and food pairing, but it's arguably, very arguably, and one of the most insane ways to sell product, by limiting what your wine goes with, or it's only best if you do it with these arbitrary metaphorical matches and so on and so forth. So use this time to kind of also spread out in there. I don't know the answer to your question, Paul, but there's all sorts of data and research. I tend to speak at a lot of tourism and development conferences, and more there will be special sessions on tourism and pot. Studies done in Colorado on the impact of not only the within the state and to the residents, but the immense amount of tourism and tourism dollars that legalization in Colorado had opened up, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as that becomes more common, as more states, and I'm not sure, how quickly this will happen, but if other states around Colorado then legalize pot, then that tourism aspect, those extra dollars go away for Colorado, because if you've got it locally, you don't need to go there to get it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So the SWOT analysis can be applied to a business also. So as a business, as a company internally, what are you good at? What are you not good at? And what do you plan for? And I'll segue this into a retail example for you, Paul. And then externally, what's going on? What's out there in the market? What are you up against? What kind of opportunities? What kind of threats? And very often there could be certain situations that at once are an opportunity or a threat, but as yet undeveloped or undefined, or could be very different under different circumstances down the road. So again, you're forecasting your vision, your mission, and your goals, and how things unfold, so that you might have something equally as an opportunity or a threat, but to keep an eye on as other external factors develop. Okay. Well, there's Mr. Rich. So, so this is basically how we're going to go through this, and we were talking really quickly about Rich's thoughts about expanding retail presence into different states. And being a Miami boy, born in Ohio, but moved to Florida in 1957 with our family. Have you looked into licenses, retail licenses, and that kind of stuff in Miami yet?
I haven't, no.
They are expensive.
Oh, really? Okay.
And it's a lottery, and they're saleable. So the highest level of licensing, which would be consumption on and off premises, for beer, wine, and liquor, can be hundreds of thousands of dollars just for the license. And this may be, and then you've got to do a market analysis. You gave as an example, it didn't seem to be many specialty stores, wine stores. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
So one to look at is the one that I started buying wine at when I was 17, and oh my God, Sunset Package Store, Sunset Package and Liquor and Wine. It's on let's see, what is it? Sunset Drive and 87th Avenue in Miami. It's a great destination, big player wine store. But as you start to again look at a market opportunity, you start to make a list of what needs to be done in this channel to open a store. What kind of requirements? Obviously, you've got real estate and the cost of a building or building a building. Are you going to be in a mall? What square footage? You can start to do that. But the real key thing is looking at licensing and permits and zoning and what you need there. But and then a separate component of that is starting to look at the competitive environment and ask really carefully, if there are not a lot of specialty stores, why not? And a huge amount of Florida business is actually, wine businesses, I think more so than any other state, is done in drugstores, as an example. You will find a lot of higher end stores in places like Naples. I've got some good friends there that have a store. So this is the opportunity to have a structure for step-by-step, kind of what are the jobs to be done, what are the opportunities, doing SWOT analysis, you know, kind of as a continuing practice, and that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. So we'll be going this over in more detail, especially Monday. But basically, creating your wine in Winery Overview, and this would be like your elevator pitch. I'm not looking for a lot of details in this, and especially if you're a newbie. The other thing is, if you have a business plan already started, you can use that as your final project. And if there's, when you turn it in, or if you want to have a conversation with me, if you're working on a business plan, I can tick you off already for that portion of credit for your certificate from the course. Because I also get a lot of people don't want to share those kind of things, though. You know, I would never share anybody's plan with anybody under any circumstances without permission. So you know, what's the name of your winery? What are you calling the wine? How many cases are you going to produce? What's your MSRP? That would be your stated price. Would that be your selling price, or is that, you know, part of the game of establishing a higher sense of value? But your actual selling price is the real business number that needs to be known versus a stated MSRP. And then whether you're doing your own career plan, whether you're doing a retail startup or whatever, what do you intend to accomplish? That's your mission. And so it should be a very specific, this is what we are going to accomplish by this date. All right, so a mission should not only have what is to be accomplished, but by when. Okay. In the case of a wine, it would be, we intend to have this wine packaged in the warehouse, ready for distribution by this date. Or it could be that we intend in a year and 5 years to be making X thousands of cases of this product, and so forth. So again, a mission of what you're going to accomplish and when. The vision is much more is more difficult to define, because it's kind of what you see out in the future. And then your business goals and objectives are highly specific, generally very specific numbers, financials, quantities, and by when. And this is where you would also typically have a 5-year or a 10-year, a 15-year plan of what business goals and objectives that you have for this product. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. And then just some things, again, not looking for a lot of details, but for the wine that you're making, are you going to be sourcing grapes, and how much of your time and effort, how are you going to manage grape growing and or grower relationships, who's handling the paperwork, the compliance licenses? It's a biggie for you, Paul, in Miami. Maintenance, winemaking, et cetera, et cetera. So these are kind of jobs to be done, if you will, and getting present to that. What's your wine production model? How, other than selling wine, do you have any other ways that you're going to generate revenue? And then we'll start to get into defining the market and the market strategy. So I'd love everybody to, I'll send this out today, and then Monday night we're going to go through this in detail, so that also any comments or questions that come up when you go through this, we can cover them. That sound good for everybody? All right.
Tim, can you hear me? It's Noelle.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry about the camera. We've got construction going on here, and it's very it's distracting.
No
But and I think you covered this already. But if we wanted to do a little bit different of a business than a winery, such as perhaps an importing business, would that be okay to do on this for this project?
No, for the project, actually, I'd like it to be a wine.
Okay.
But where's the key market you're looking to import wines from or to?
Well, they'll be coming from France into Pennsylvania.
Okay, great. So I want you to use this, and this, and you're at a high enough level, and we can discuss this separately if needed also. I want you to do a French wine.
Okay, no
in
problem.
US dollars.
Okay.
And then in your marketing plan, what are you going to do? How, what would you have to do if this were a French wine? And you could put it two ways. Maybe putting yourself into the place of a French wine producer that's then going to sell the wine in the US. Or maybe it's a wine that you want to produce from bulk wines or on contract or whatever, and then bring in for your own distribution. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you so much.
At the same time, then start to use this for your company, for your company name, and how many cases are you going to be looking to build to import? What would be the average pricing and volumes? As an importer, what's your mission, your vision, and your goals? What kind of things, what kind of jobs need to be done, and that kind of stuff. So you can simultaneously use this for the start on your business plan if you haven't started that already.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right. And then, let me close a window here. So as we go into this, I'm going to use a tasting room example. And here's sort of an outline of considerations in a tasting room of what you need to do to succeed, and if you will, the jobs to be done. So if you've got a tasting room, you've got to get visitors and customers. There's many ways you can break it down, far beyond what I'm thinking, but in terms of generating traffic, if we were to look at strengths and weaknesses of a tasting room location, are you in a place that people are coming kind of with the idea we're going to wineries? Or are you in a place that people are coming, but they really might not even know wineries are in the area? Is it a high traffic destination? Are you far off the beaten path? So in terms of generating traffic in your tasting room, you can look at location, strengths and weaknesses, um, kind of accessibility, those kind of things. And then how would you market your tasting room to individuals and families and that kind of thing? But is there any additional opportunity to market for groups to do a different type of ways? When I was a chef in Asheville, North Carolina, and marketing didn't tell me that they were diverting buses to come have breakfast at the hotel. And we were it was a big dining room, it was seated 200 plus people, and we would prepare for maybe 15 or 20 breakfasts. Then all of a sudden the shit hits the fan and somebody says, we got a dining room that's full, and it's because they got tour buses. And these are the kind of things, are there winery tours? Are there different ways you can get people to the tasting room? And the play that's going on right now in Napa is that the limo drivers, the tour services actually charge wineries a fee to bring people to the winery. And it's not cheap. And so what's happening is, in marketing the limo service or the tour services, and focusing on maybe a certain class of trade, that anybody that's going to be using this limo service or tour service, or and it's buses and whatever, they're typically more highly qualified buyers, meaning they can afford the limo service, and that they're really they're carefully planning, and so to be on these tour schedules, wineries have to pay $500 a month or way more just to have those services come to their wineries. That's how the competition is going there. You need to offer an experience, and it might just simply be, hey y'all, how you doing? Want to try some glass of our nice wine? But can you do anything that differentiates you, that offers more value, and even more importantly, has people walk away positively talking about their experience and what they did? Tasting room success absolutely requires the ability to shift from taking shoppers who are just stopping to look around, maybe get some pictures. Would you like a tasting, which most people are charging for now, and then from that, converting them to a sale of wine, and even more importantly, getting them to sign up and make a commitment to become a wine club member, get on the mailing list, or whatever, right? And at that point, you start to look at customer retention and the wine club churn rate, ongoing communications. Something really hard to measure, but incredibly important. When that customer goes home from the tasting room, do they continue to look for your wines and purchase your wines in stores, in restaurants, or via the wine club? Okay, and so this is kind of what you're trying to accomplish in a tasting room. Any questions about that? Now, if you're selling just through an internet store, it makes it even harder. How do you connect? How do you create a virtual visitor's experience? How do you get somebody that happens to be perusing your website and offerings? How do you actually get a sale out of that? And then Paul, you would be looking at this as your retail store success. You're going to have to generate traffic, create experiences, convert, and maintain the customer relationship management or CRM aspect of it as well.
Could this be the same aspect sort of for a wine bar too as well? Like
Yes.
the tasting room wine bar?
And this is, it's kind of a fascinating evolution, and it's also part of what we were discussing on Monday night. As laws are changing, the whole thing with the Supreme Court, and Rich, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that whole Supreme Court thing came about based on a sort of arcane Tennessee law that stipulated to apply for a liquor license, you had to be a resident of Tennessee for a minimum of 2 years. And there was
actually there was a case before that in which the Supreme Court ruled on it, but then they used this Tennessee case to go back and rectify I guess the decision in the last one was written sort of sloppily.
Yeah.
And it left room for interpretation. So they just basically grabbed this one and said, okay, we're going to put an end to it. No longer do you have this loophole or this in the interpretation. And essentially it says if you have a law within your state that applies to whether it's the wineries in the state, the retailers in the state, anything else, that it has to apply equally to interstate.
Got it. Yeah. And this is going to be hotly contested. Everybody's going to be looking for the new loopholes. So it'll be really, really interesting to see how this plays out over the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
As online wine sales have expanded and have been clarified, as wine clubs have gained more popularity and account for more and more of the sales, remember that a tasting room fundamentally is a retail wine store and a wine bar. And there are different licensing details in individual states, but fundamentally you will have to have a license for off-premise consumption, meaning you sell bottles and cases of unopened product to be consumed off the premises, and then usually require some level of licensing for on-premise. So you're going to be operating and serving. You'll have all sorts of permits and requirements. By fundamentally now you're a bar, and you may have food products and so on. I am the proud recipient. Let me get it here. This is just so, my wife thinks this was just absolutely hysterical. I went to an event that I was asked to be sort of the grand poobah for a fundraising event here. And I was told I couldn't pour any wine because I did not have my Oregon permit. I have to have an Oregon Liquor Control Commission service permit. And this is for anybody who's serving wine as a volunteer, as a profession, as a master of wine or whatever. You have to have this permit to be able to pour at a public event. So you've really got to be careful to be looking at for a tasting room or a retail environment. It's pretty much the same thing. And going back to the diversification, I'm sorry, and of how else are you going to generate revenue. If you've got a tasting room, you may or may not be selling merchandise. You may or may not be selling food items, or even more so, perishable food items. And you've got to make sure that you've got everything covered. And it could be just offering a basket of crackers on the tasting bar. It could be construed as food service. So you've got to be really careful about what you're getting into in the details.
May I ask Paul a question?
Please.
You're opening a retail establishment, is that correct?
Well, no, not really. It was one of the avenues that I was exploring. I had a friend who's involved in that and has a retail store, and I think he's looking to perhaps change his partners. So it was something that I was thinking about exploring.
I gotcha. I was just going to say, one of the neatest things I've ever seen in a retail wine, well, it was a liquor store, wine store, but heavily to the wine, was they actually, and you don't find too much of it around here, was they had a below grade wine cellar where you could rent lockers to store your wine. It wasn't real, but he got a pretty
about that
basis. And they would conduct their wine tastings with all of the distributor reps that came around, and sometimes the wineries direct would come and do the tastings. But the storage was built such that they were basically cages, and you could see all the cool wines that everybody had in their cages, and it almost created like this envy. So you wanted to keep going and buying more wine and getting a bigger cage and getting more wine. And it just perpetuated itself. But it was one of the most clever things I've ever seen.
Yes, and comes with a really important need for SWOT analysis and for fleshing out. One of my best friends in here in Bend has Bend Wine Cellars, and he started as a retail store with a little bit of storage, but the storage ended up being more and more profitable, and he's also retired. So he kept just opening the stores a couple days a week. But then he ran into a dilemma, because it also opens up all sorts of liabilities and logistical issues. Because wine pilferage is a big problem, and especially at the higher end. And so granting access to his clients in a timely fashion. And just a few months ago, he got rid of the retail entirely, because he found that retail and storage actually had so many liabilities and logistics problems, and it's all very highly technical wine storage. Now, you could do wine storage in a separate facility or an area with limited access, kind of a thing.
You had to have them open the door to go down the stairs. They knew who was down there. They had cameras, and then everyone had their own individual padlocks on their own individual lockers.
No, understood, and all that's available. Again, the due diligence, the devil's in the details, and then also assessing on a square foot basis when you're looking at your potential, when you're doing a SWOT analysis. The trade-off is that's backup storage for wine, or for this, for holding capacity and more purchasing power potentially, so you can buy bigger deals and whatever, and have that. So what's your trade-off, if any? And so all I'm saying is there's a lot of things to consider in something like that. But those are the key differentiators. Keeps people coming in every week, and as Rich is saying, boy, that power of why do they have all that? Can I get some?
I started off with a locker that probably held maybe a dozen cases and ended up with, I think at my peak, I probably had about 120 cases down there.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And you would find yourself all the time, well, you start out doing it that way because in the beginning, it's a lot cheaper than going and buying a large wine cellar for your home.
Yeah.
But then as you start accumulating more wine, it does start getting more expensive. But you find yourself going down there all the time just to pick up some wine. And then you see your guy and he says, hey, look what just came in. And, before you even get down to your locker, you're taking another case down there. And
No, and that whole social ego thing, when I was a retailer in Atlanta, I had less than 2,000 square feet of my wine section at a place called Happy Herman's. And we were beer and we were liquor and we were gourmet groceries and a full service deli. And I built my business so that we were bringing in 800 case containers of top end Bordeaux's or Burgundies and stuff like that. And we didn't have storage room for it. So I would try to, and because of the state laws, it's a COD state. Very, very much is set up by the distributors. So that when the shipment came, I had to write a good check for the entire amount. I couldn't, no loans, no floating.
oh, wow.
If I only took a small portion of the shipment and some of it went in the warehouse, it was then fair game for anybody who knew about it, any of my competitors, to buy it at whatever the negotiated price I had.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to take 800 mostly wooden box cases, pre-sell the hell out of it as much as I could, and then I would have these stacks all around. So this was this doctor's or this attorney's stack, and I would staple the invoice to the stack. But then I still had probably 400 or 500 cases of unsold product. And so I just started making stacks. And then I thought, oh my God, to your point, Rich, I would take one of my key customers, I would build a stack of wines that customer's stack didn't have, but I want to sell them. I'd make a fake invoice and staple that to the stack. And then when they come in and say, I'm here to pick this up, they go, shouldn't I have some of this Domaine de Chevalier or this? I say, well, we've got some extra, but, Fred here, the fake invoice, they go, well, why don't you put a couple cases? I swear my additional sales was 30% on top of what was already prepaid and being picked up, which is extraordinary. And this is the key. This really hits the nail on the head. Offering that extra service. Again, be careful, find out what insurance, what liabilities, etc. Can people, get to it in a timely fashion? Do you have all your bases covered? And then you've got, if Rich is coming in to pick up the wines for the weekend and whatever, and you've got new stuff around and you've got other people to talk to there and maybe a tasting going on, you've created a customer relationship management program that's just killer by offering storage lockers, which can generate revenue themselves.
Those things generated probably more per square foot than the store upstairs did.
Exactly right. That's what my friend found. He made more money just selling storage. And now, and he's got it with the cameras. He's got it with the entry codes. So there's a process that you've got to show your face, enter the code. The code's associated with the locker. They know how long you've spent. They can see every movement while you're in there, et cetera, et cetera. And now he's got a a primarily hands-off business that he's enjoying it a lot more. And if you took a market like Miami, as we were talking about, Paul, now you're in a hot, humid situation that could be a really, really valuable differentiator.
They had one more thing that they did, and that was that they would offer for the tastings that they were going to do down in the storage cellar. They would offer it to the people who had storage spaces first.
Yes.
And tell them they could bring friends, because they figured if you're a friend to somebody that had storage down there, you might be the kind of person to jump in and take some storage and also want to fill your locker up. So it was really a good plan.
Yeah. So any more questions about that, Paul, Noel?
No, great idea. Thank you.
Sure.
So then moving in, and again using tasting room as an example. This was our friends at Silicon Valley Bank put together some research to see if you were seated at a private or formal tasting versus standing at the tasting bar versus a tasting bar with seats added versus having casual seating, indoor, outdoor, what's the percentage, what's your conversion rate of people just sitting there enjoying what maybe wine by the glass and whatever to actually purchasing something? And so it's pretty easy to see that a private or formal seated tasting has they stretch us out to make it a little bit more than it actually is, but it's a good uptick. The question that I would propose then, take the contrarian view. What are the downsides of seated tasting, private or formal?
Expense. Far more expense.
Yeah, and where do those expenses come in?
I would say the main one, that tastings like that I've been to out here are that, you pretty much have an appointment and you have a greeter and you have one person that's assigned to you and your group for as long as you sit there and sip on your wine. So I would say it's labor.
Yeah. So you've got several. Number one, where are you going to do it? So there is the locale. And if you have that locale, what are you taking away in terms of maybe higher volume at a standing, tasting room and so forth? You definitely have higher labor. You need somebody a little bit more, perhaps, as a wine educator or advanced sommelier or something like that to conduct it. You then also have the furnishings, but in the seated tasting, is there some sort of wine and food experience, or additional food costs, that kind of stuff? Along with the labor is setting these up, coordinating them, all this other stuff. And at the end of the day, does that justify a 3% increase in conversion rate? Now, this doesn't account for the fact that you charge a premium for that. So again, I'm not arguing one way or another, but it requires this SWOT analysis. Do you have the space to do it? Or if not, can you repurpose those strengths and weaknesses? Can you handle the invitations, or do you set something up online and whatever, what needs to be done there, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going through and just analyzing each situation, knowing what you're getting into, and if it justifies that expense. And like we said, people, offer a storage facility and find out that's more profitable than selling wine in the first place. And they shut the whole damn store down and just do wine. It's called Bend Wine Cellars, if anybody wants to look it up online and kind of see what their business model is.
Hey, just a little off topic, but I'm pretty sure you've probably been to Burn's Steakhouse, huh?
So my dad used to bring the wine list back when it was 17 pages. And for those not in the know, it's now 2 books of about 300 pages each. It's the largest wine selection in the world. And I worked at Burn's Steakhouse, dropped out of college, University of South Florida in Tampa in 1972, and went to work at Burn's.
That's a cool place.
It is awesome. And you want me on your hot helpline if you go there. Seriously, you do.
Is that right?
Yeah, I worked there for a number of months actually, and then got my formal apprenticeship in pastries as a chef, and left that. But it's one of, in germane to this conversation. Do you know how Burn's started? What their first restaurant was?
I've read the story and stuff, but I can't remember offhand.
So it's Bern and Gert Laxer, Laxer. They opened a hamburger joint across from the University of Tampa, in a really cool older area of Tampa. They grew and expand and took over the Electrolux vacuum place when that went out of business. And then there was a strip mall and attached to a Winn-Dixie shopping center. So they started as a hamburger joint. They expanded to the Electrolux space. They then bought the pharmacy. Then they bought the Winn-Dixie. So that the actual steakhouse structure is actually a Winn-Dixie. They started buying up houses in the area. They owned 7 houses, each one dedicated for the Smokey the Bear charcoal briquettes. Another one was just coffee beans and the roasting and all that kind of stuff. Another one was where they were doing the printing back in the day before electronics and modern printing. And then now, since Bern passed away, Bern was actually a vegetarian and had been in a serious car wreck and only had 1 lung. So he was a 1-lunged Jewish vegetarian running the highest volume steakhouse in the country with probably the greatest wine list in the world.
Yeah, undoubtedly has that.
And they've got now bars, they've got additional restaurants. They've become almost like this entire little city within a city.
And they have the dessert rooms, and I don't know, well, you were in the pastry side. What did they have, about 100 fresh desserts you could order?
No, I was there before the dessert room, but I was privy to how that all developed.
Okay.
So remember, I was there 40 years ago. Almost 50 years ago.
Okay. Well, yeah, because you could reserve a dessert room and go and drink 100-plus-year-old brandies or whatever. I mean, all that stuff.
We're going to need to wrap this up. Let me get to the diversification point. I love it. I could talk all day about this. 220 seats, and on a Saturday night, we could do 1,200 meals. That's unheard of. 220 seats, 1,200 dinners. Any football fans that are out there, the host at the host stand was John Matuzak, who was later the Oakland Raider who died tragically and very young. But what they decided was they ran into a revenue and logistics bottleneck. And they thought, well, how can we have people have a leisurely dinner, not rushed, not pressured, but get them the hell out of their seats so that we can turn it even more? And so they created what's called the Harry Waugh Room. And so they built this in the mezzanine of what was the grocery store, where the offices and whatever. They talked with a winery in California and took these huge oak vats, you know, the old sort of redwood storage tanks, had them sawn in half and then put into headspace in trucks to get them shipped for free out to Tampa, and then made booths out of those, and then created the dessert menu and the dessert wines. We'll talk about that later. And so, thank you so much. May I recommend for dessert that we get your ass out of the seat so we can get more diners in here, which was...
They would ask you if you wanted to make a reservation, like almost creating the demand and the want to do that. You're like, oh.
And it was all specifically to drive more volume.
And actually, they would ask you before you went to your dessert room if you wanted to take a tour of the kitchen and the wine cellar.
Yes, indeed. Yep. So again, you know, as we go into this real quickly, I'm sorry for. Well, I'll hold this for Monday. Monday, we're going to go over two things that anybody who would like to can look. If you go back into the spreadsheet server cost of goods thing, save your work, go to auto filter, and take a look at the wine pricing calculator, okay? And what I want you to do, what we'll do Monday is kind of go over this a little bit, because going back to what we were talking about, the produce versus, you know, the wine model, and if wineries could go direct, you know, what's kind of that middle piece of profit that they could get, and this is a detailed workbook for putting in your FOB cost, going through a complete US 3-tier system, markups and costs and taxes and brokers and all that kind of stuff. There's also an export page that, Noel, I think you will find very helpful, because it just takes into account additional duties and potential broker fees.
Thank
and
you.
Then we'll give you a very detailed workup of pricing in retail and restaurant for both domestic and export. Okay. And then the other workbook, and this one's going to be for you, Paul, and anybody who else. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go to auto filter, and I'm going to go to the tasting room profitability calculator and hit new. And this is what that looks like. And you can actually build the complete retail pro forma for a store and tasting bar, wine bar with this, and we'll go over this in a little bit more detail. Okay. So anybody who wants to go in and take a look at those, please feel free. And I think we're kind of to the end of it. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any burning questions, comments?
Nope.
Okay. Great.
Have a good one.
Thank you guys
Take care,
all so
guys.
much, and we'll talk on Monday. Bye-bye.